Hello and welcome to the first episode of Amadeus, Hollywood vs. History. My name is Chris Wright and I will be your guide through the 1984 Milos Forman film Amadeus on a trek to discover how much of the film is based on historical fact and how much is Hollywood fantasy. But first, a couple of quick notes. Number 1. You may want to view the introduction video to the series before this one, as it will tell you what the scope and function of the series is. Number 2, we will be using the theatrical release of the film and not the director's cut. After we've completed all the episodes for the theatrical release, I will probably do an auxiliary episode concerning the additional scenes found in the director's cut. If you are viewing this episode at the time of its release, you can view Amadeus on Netflix, but please note that it is the director's cut. Okay, let's begin. I will be incorporating viewer questions in future episodes, but for this episode, I will be sticking to the first 10 questions I wrote down the last time I viewed the film. We will start at the beginning of the film and work our way through it. Although a great amount of research has been done to provide accurate answers to these questions, I will be keeping the answers as pithy as possible, so please don't expect the information I provide to be exhaustive. I will be wrapping up each answer by giving an indication of how truthful the film was to factual history. Oh, and by the way, question number 1. Did Salieri try to kill himself? The film opens with Salieri's valet breaking down a door to discover that the old man has slit his own throat out of remorse for killing Mozart. Trying to figure out whether or not Salieri really did such a thing to himself proved quite difficult. But I did come across a few published books and online articles that referenced it as historical fact. Some even stating Salieri may have attempted it twice. The most interesting historical reference to Salieri slitting his own throat was recorded in November 1823 in one of Beethoven's conversation books, where a friend of his writes, "Salieri has cut his own throat, but is still alive." I also discovered that Peter Shaffer's play, which the film is adapted from, makes reference to that entry in Beethoven's conversation books. My verdict on this question is plausible. Salieri probably did attempt suicide by cutting his own throat, but I still remain a bit skeptical. Question number 2. Was Salieri committed to an asylum? In the film, Salieri is taken to a madhouse after attempting suicide. In reality, Salieri was admitted to Vienna General Hospital in October 1823 due to his declining health. It had become so bad that his oldest daughter could no longer take care of him. You see, earlier that year, Salieri fell and hit his head, which left his legs mostly paralyzed. Salieri would die in that hospital 2 years later in 1825. The hospital did have an extension to it called the Narantorum, which, interestingly enough, was continental Europe's first hospital dedicated to treating the mentally ill. My verdict on this question is false. There are many records that show Salieri was admitted to the General Hospital of Vienna, but I came across nothing that said he was admitted to the Narantorum. Question number 3. How many operas did Salieri compose? In the film, Salieri tells the priest who visits him that he wrote over 40 operas alone. In reality, Salieri composed 42 operas, but 5 of those were never performed while he was living. So my verdict on this question is false, but I understand why the filmmakers went with 40, as it is a round number and gets the general idea across that Salieri was a respected, prolific composer of opera. Question number 4. Did Mozart ever play for the Pope in Rome? In the film, Salieri states that Mozart, as a child prodigy, performed for royalty all across Europe, even the Pope in Rome. We even see a young Mozart blindfolded playing the harpsichord for the Pope. In reality, Mozart did tour Europe as a child prodigy, gaining the attention and praise of the nobility. Mozart and his father did visit Rome in 1770, while Mozart was 14. There, the teenage Mozart heard a piece of music performed in the Sistine Chapel. Unable to sleep that night, Mozart wrote the 15-minute-long work for 2 choirs down from memory. The problem was this piece of sacred choral music was banned from being copied, and the penalty for doing so was excommunication. When Pope Clement XIV got word of what young Mozart had done, he summoned Mozart before him. Instead of excommunicating Mozart, though, the Pope made Mozart a Knight of the Golden Spur. My verdict on this question is false. Although Mozart was a child prodigy who performed for royalty similar to what we see in the film, he never performed for the Pope in Rome, only received the knighthood. and most certainly was not as young as he appears in the film. Question number 5. Did Salieri ever claim to have killed Mozart? In the film, Salieri confesses he is Mozart's murderer, and the priest who visits him attempts to get the composer to confess that sin. In reality, it does appear that Salieri did confess to poisoning Mozart, or at least that was the fashionable rumor spreading all over Vienna in 1824. It even gets mentioned to Beethoven in his aforementioned conversation books. From what we know, Salieri did have moments where old age and poor health caused him to mutter things that were questionable or untrue. But in his moments of clarity, the composer denied having anything to do with Mozart's death. The rumors were apparently so bad that 2 of Salieri's friends signed an official document after Salieri died stating that they were present when the composer died and that no deathbed confession was given. Despite that, though, the rumors persisted, and only 5 years after Salieri died, the Russian poet Alexander Pushkin wrote a play about Salieri poisoning Mozart. My verdict on this question is confirmed, although we must take into account the state of Salieri's health at the time. Question number 6. Was Salieri's father opposed to him becoming a composer? In the film, Salieri tells the priest that his father did not care for music, and scoffed at the boy being trained in music. Let's take a quick look at Salieri's childhood to discover the truth. Antonio Salieri was born in northern Italy in 1750, the same year Johann Sebastian Bach died. He was the son of a wealthy agricultural merchant, and that prosperity meant that young Salieri was able to study music. He received instruction on the harpsichord and violin, and the boy showed promise as a singer. When Salieri was 10, one of his brothers left their home to perform music in a nearby town, and young Antonio wanted to go with him. The carriage was not big enough to carry both, but this did not keep Salieri from going to the concert. He left on foot without permission from his parents. When young Antonio returned to his parents, who were worried sick, his father threatened him with severe punishment if he ever did it again. In 1763, Salieri's mother passed away. Not long after, his father too died. With his parents gone, the 13-year-old Salieri was entrusted to the care of one of his older brothers, a monk. Gifted with a beautiful singing voice and a passion for music, the young Salieri was enlisted as first soprano in a fine monastery school. He received further training in music in Venice, and it was there that one of the court composers for Emperor Joseph II, played by Jeffrey Jones in the film, noticed the musical talents of Salieri and took the young man back to Vienna to personally instruct him. So, my verdict on this question is false. There is no evidence to suggest Salieri's father was opposed to him studying music, just sneaking away to hear concerts without permission. Question number 7. Did Salieri's father die from choking on food? In the film, we see Salieri's father choke on food at the family dinner table, then lying dead in a coffin. Salieri claims that this was God's intervention, answering his prayers to become a great composer. From my research, though, I could not find out exactly how Salieri's father died. It definitely did not happen as we see in the film for a number of reasons. The first being Salieri's father was not named Francesco, as we hear in the film. Salieri's father was also named Antonio, but this is probably why the filmmakers gave his father the name of Salieri's older brother, Francesco, even though that brother was the one who first taught music to young Antonio. Salieri's mother is also seen trying to dislodge the fishbone her husband is choking on. This wasn't possible as she died before him, so my verdict on this question is plausible, but with no proof. And to quote the late Christopher Hitchens, that which can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence. Question number 8. When did Salieri become court composer to Emperor Joseph II? In the film, Salieri states that after God's intervention, he was allowed to study music, eventually becoming court composer to the Emperor of Austria. It is true that Salieri did serve as court composer to the Emperor, beginning in 1774 when Florian Leopold Gassmann, the composer who had taken Salieri to Vienna to train, died in a freak carriage accident. The vacant position was filled by Giuseppe Bono, who is one of the minor characters in the film. Bono's former position was filled by Salieri. Salieri was also appointed to the position of Kapellmeister of the court opera around the same time. The reason for that last appointment, by the way, was due to the emperor learning that Salieri was denied marriage to his love because his income was too little. The emperor's appointment meant that Salieri now had enough income to convince his love's guardian that he could support her, and the two were wed in 1774. So, my verdict on this question is confirmed. Salieri was in fact appointed as court composer to Emperor Joseph II, albeit there were several appointments for composers for the royal court in Vienna. Question number 9. Did Mozart come to Vienna to play his music at the residence of his employer, the Prince Archbishop of Salzburg? In the film, we first see the adult Mozart, played by Tom Hulce, in a flashback scene, where Mozart had arrived in Vienna to play some of his music at the palace of the Prince Archbishop of Salzburg. The film is accurate in showing the Prince Archbishop as the employer of both Wolfgang and his father Leopold, and it is true that the prince had taken the then 25-year-old Wolfgang with him to Vienna in 1781. The reason for the visit was the festivities honoring Emperor Joseph II's appointment as the sole ruler of the Holy Roman Empire. He had been co-ruler since 1765, but his mother, Maria Theresa, was the one calling the shots, until her death in late 1780. So, my verdict on this question is confirmed, and we will learn more about what happened between Mozart and the Archbishop in Vienna during the next episode. And that leads us to the final question of this episode. Question number 10. Did Mozart really compose large works of music at a really young age? In the film, Salieri states that Mozart had written his first concerto at the age of 4, his first symphony at 7, a full-scale opera at 12. Mozart was indeed a child prodigy when it came to music, but his first true composition was at age 5, and it certainly wasn't on the scale of a concerto. His first concerto for piano was composed when Mozart was 11. His first symphony was composed when he was 8, not 7, as stated in the film. Mozart's first opera was a sacred drama called Die Schuldigkeit des ersten Gebots, performed in Salzburg when Mozart was 11. His first serious Italian opera wasn't composed until he was 16. So my verdict for this question is false. While the information given in the film does get across the point that Mozart was a gifted musical prodigy, the information is quite inaccurate. Maybe we should chalk it up to Salieri in the film being an old man in a crazy house when he tells us the information. Well, that concludes the first episode of this series. For the next episode, we will deal with 10 more questions concerning the film, picking up where we left off. If you enjoyed this episode and appreciate the work I've put into it, please like and subscribe. Be sure to also share it with your friends and anyone who might find it interesting. Thanks for watching.